I'd say make sure that you don't just create a page for your service or your product, but make sure you create pages that support that content, support that main page, because the more content that you put out on your website that supports that one keyword, the more relevant you become to that search, the more authority you have, and focusing on that EEAT, making sure that you're trying to touch on all bases to make sure that Google sees that you are not just throwing up a page, but you actually have that relevancy around that whole entire topic. So then you could pick up on long tail keywords, variations, singular, plural, synonyms, or industry jargon, or other ways that people search, because people don't just search one way, especially nowadays with voice search. Half the searches nowadays are new searches that no one's ever seen. So if you're trying to rank for every keyword, it's not possible. But having that main focus keyword and then the supporting keywords, that's going to help you hit all the different variations and not just be stuck on that one keyword set. I'm Brandon Leibowitz, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights.
Brandon, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
Topical authority is going to help you move up those rankings.
Topical authority. So what is topical authority?
Topical authority is creating multiple content pieces supporting a topic instead of just having one page on your website about a service or a product that you're offering. Having multiple pages that support that keyword shows Google that you're more relevant versus just having one page. It's okay, but if you really want to show yourself as a subject matter expert, topical authority, then having multiple articles and blogs and content supporting that one subject matter is going to help you move up more.
And is this structured like some kind of hub and spoke model where you've got your more competitive keyword phrases perhaps on your core page, and then you've got sub pages that you publish and you link towards the main page from the sub page?
Yep. So kind of like a silo, and then you make a main pillar page, and then you'd have supporting pages that link to that main page. You'd have blog posts that link to that main page. You could have FAQ content or any content pieces that just all are related to that. As long as they all interlink, that shows Google that they are related. So internal linking is very important with this, making sure that you link the right topics to the right subject matter expertise. So linking those blogs to that pillar content with the right anchor text as well is going to help show that they're all interrelated.
And are you talking about linking from the pillar page to the sub page as well as the sub pages to the pillar page?
Yep. You want to interlink them all together. That way they see that they're all related. Mainly linking the blogs to the pillar page, but then you can also link the pillar page out to the blogs as well. And then linking the blogs together, linking those sub pages together as well.
And how do you decide on what content to cover?
That is where I would do keyword research, look at what long tail keywords are supporting that main focus keyword. And then looking at also Google's people also ask section and trying to figure out what are high search volume phrases that people commonly ask that I can incorporate into this content or make it standalone pieces to help support that. But usually I'll just do some keyword research using Google Keyword Planner or Ahrefs or Moz or other tools to help do keyword research, but trying to putting that main keyword in there and then finding those long tail keywords and other variations and topics, looking at like people also answer the public. So you could see high search volume phrases, questions that people commonly ask, and you could create content support around that, supporting that topic, and just trying to look in as many different places as possible to get ideas, take it a step back, thinking if I was looking for this product or service or keyword, what would I be searching? What would interest me? What would get me to want to use this product or service? So not just thinking about the main keyword, but thinking about keywords that support that main keyword.
So it appears that everything leads from the main keyword. How do you actually come up with the main keyword to begin with?
The main keyword would be doing keyword research as well and trying to figure out, should I use a singular or plural or synonym of a keyword? So one of my clients, they're a personal injury law firm. They want to rank for personal injury lawyer, which is great. Gets 20,000 searches in Los Angeles each month, but personal injury lawyers gets 200,000 searches each month. So trying to find the keyword that gets the most search volume, that still has a buyer intent, still is relevant, and using that as the main focus keyword. And then from there, doing research around keywords that support that keyword So long tail variations or the other ones, reordering the words, structuring them differently, and just making sure there's no overlap on the main pillar page versus other pages.
I guess one main challenge nowadays is selecting the correct audience intent. Because using your example, personal injury lawyer is perhaps the plural version gets 10 times as many visits potentially, or at least searches. But I guess there's a chance that someone searching the plural version could be looking for some kind of comparison site and not want to go immediately to an individual lawyer. So how do you differentiate between a keyword that can bring you a lot of traffic versus a keyword that's most likely to convert?
That's where you have to look at that keyword and the intent behind that keyword and realize if it's going to be a comparison, then let's make it a comparison article or blog or content piece that supports it. But you got to make sure the content fits the keywords that you're targeting. Otherwise, it's going to drive that wrong traffic and you're going to get traffic. They're going to leave. Google will look at that bounce engagement rate and see that a lot of people are coming and going. And if a lot of people leave your website immediately, that does not look good either. And we don't want that to happen. So trying to make sure that the content aligns with that keyword and trying to really look at the competition, seeing who's on that first page of Google, what type of content pieces are everyone putting out, and try and make sure that you replicate it. Because if you see everyone has comparisons and you're trying to rank for your personal profile on your website for law, might not work. But if you see other websites that are showing individual lawyers along with the comparisons, then Google's saying, we don't really understand the intent behind this keyword, so we're trying to show both. And then you might have a chance of getting in, but it's much better if it just shows a bunch of lawyers. Then, this is my type of keyword. Google's showing the same type of businesses that are related to me, but definitely looking at the competition and seeing who's ranking. That way you can figure out the intent behind that search.
Okay. So I was going to ask you how you figure out the intent, but you finished off with there by talking about the competition. So is that the main way that you figure out the intent?
Looking at who Google's showing. So you could tell the intent by the websites that Google's ranking. And if Google's showing a bunch of different websites where it's not just one similar type, like the lawyer one, if they're showing lawyer profiles, but they're also showing Yelp and comparison websites, and then you might be like, all right, Google doesn't really know what the intent is for this keyword. So they're just showing a bunch and they're just trying to guess at what someone's searching for, because it could be either or. But if you just see the search results are just full of comparison sites, then Google's only going to rank comparison sites. And if you don't have a comparison article or blog or content piece, then you're probably not going to be able to show for that keyword.
Okay. And talking about keywords again, so you talked about selecting your main keyword and then having other keywords that probably come from questions from tools like Answer the Public. So you could potentially have hundreds of different possibilities from a main keyword. So how do you prioritize the questions that are best to write content about?
Yeah, I would start with the people also ask on Google, because this is Google saying these are high search volume phrases that people commonly ask when they're searching for that one keyword. And if you could write content about that, that's going to help you show up in a lot of other places, AI overviews, voice search, Alexa, Siri, but also Google saying this is probably one of the most relevant phrases, questions that somebody's searching. So I would start with those people also ask first. Then I would start looking at other tools, but I would always go with Google first. People also ask, and then also look at the autofill when you just start typing your keyword in, the autocomplete. You can see that drop down that appears on Google. These are also high search volume keywords, not necessarily questions, but phrases that you could pull from. And then just trying to look at those long tail keywords using tools like Ahrefs and try to pull those ones out as well.
Okay. And you've got your keywords. So then how do you move on to deciding on what content needs to be produced for each keyword?
Then I would start Googling my keywords and seeing who's on that first page of Google, or you could use a tool like Surfer SEO and see who's on that first page of Google and look at how much text everyone's using, what type of content they're using, pretty much how they structure their content, what the content is about, and build off that and try to just see what everyone is doing and what type of content, what structure. Are they starting off with a video? Are they starting off with text, bullet points? Are they starting off? How are they writing this content? And just trying to replicate what I see everyone else is doing and not copying their content, but copying their structure and copying their ideas, because Google's saying, hey, we want everyone to write 800 words. and then I come out and write 2,000 words, that might look a little weird, and want to try to make it blend in and serve that buyer intent, serve that user intent properly.
So you talked a lot about competitors there in terms of what the competitors are doing in terms of the content, the style of the content, the structure of the content, what type of content they choose to publish. How do you differentiate your content? Because you also talk about wanting to be the topical authority within your industry. And if you're just studying competitors, then perhaps you're going to produce the best version of your competitors, or maybe something comparable to what your competitors are doing. Do you try and bring in different elements that differentiates what you do to make you head and shoulders above the competition?
That's where you want to work on the EEAT, trying to show the experience, expertise, authority, trust, making sure that you have a good author bio at the bottom. If you could have case studies or testimonials or statistics or anything to help just make your content stand out as being very helpful, very unique, and not just the same kind of cookie cutter content that everyone else is putting, but trying to make sure it differentiates and stands out. And so adding outbound links when relevant to authority niche sites to help also show that relevancy, but trying to just make sure that your content is written as well as possible, has unique data points and statistics and things like that to just help you stand out. Otherwise, you're going to just get lost in that sea of content that everyone else is producing, and you want to really make sure that you have the best of the best. And that's where you got to take that extra time and really dive into that content and look for unique topics, unique standing points or talking points to put into that piece.
Are you seeing any trends in terms of the type of content that seems to be successful at the moment? Are you seeing more video in there? Are you seeing any typical trend in terms of the length of content or the way it's structured?
I'd say breaking it into multiple paragraphs, not long, big blocks of text, that header tags, bullet points, numbered lists, but just really looking at the header tags and how you structure that helps out a lot. The length, it varies depending on the intent behind that search. So in general, more is better, but you don't want to overdo it and put too much text there. That's just fluff and cookie cutter content that's not really helpful for the reader. So just trying to make sure that you write for the reader and not just trying to stuff extra text in there just to stuff it in, because a lot of people will do that thinking if I write 4,000 words, that's going to be even better, which maybe 15 years ago that was the case. But nowadays Google wants quality over quantity with everything, and just making sure you write for the reader, have their intent, hook them at the beginning, put those keywords at the beginning if you can, into the header tags as well, and then focusing on those other pillar pieces or those sub pages and making sure that you have content that kind of teases them in a little bit, linking out to those as well.
And now more and more people or more websites are getting their content published elsewhere, not necessarily having consumers visiting their website to consume their content because of the advent of AI. So what does this strategy actually mean in terms of the evolving face of where people consume content? Can this type of content be regularly consumed and reproduced by AI search engines, or is your ultimate goal always to drive people back to your website?
It would be nice to drive people to the website, but ever since Google introduced that featured snippet back in 2013-ish, then we just saw traffic slowly dropping, depending on what site. Like Wikipedia got hit pretty hard because they're just pulling from schema statistics or information that people are searching, and AI is doing that even more so, where they're not really putting those links anymore. I mean, they're having links and they're changing how the results are, but basically they kind of want to keep you on that platform. They don't want you leaving, because same thing with Google with the featured snippets. If you're asking the age of a celebrity, there's probably not ads around that keyword. Google's like, why don't we just give you the answer right there? And then hopefully you might do a search again for something related to that actor, maybe a movie that they were in. And then there's ads there because Google wants to make that ad revenue, and they'd rather you stay on Google longer than leaving and going to your own website. And that's something that we just have to deal with nowadays. It's just trying to build yourself up. It's like, hey, I saw that Brandon was the feature snippet or in the AI overview. Even though I'm not going to his website, I see that he provides the content for that. And hopefully over time that builds your brand up and builds you up as a subject matter expert. But it is that balance of just realizing that traffic has been on the decline since feature snippets came out for people that had schema really well on their website, and it's going to keep dropping more and more, especially with AI. But we'll have to see how AI and these LLM platforms start incorporating links or let people click out. But for now, you're kind of closed in there for the most part. They do have links, but they make them very tiny, and it's not the main focus. The main focus is give you the answer, which then takes away that traffic from your website.
And where does this fit into an overarching strategy, and how regularly do you do this? Is this something that you perhaps sit down once a month with a client and create some kind of topical hub on a regular basis among other SEO activities?
Yeah, it just depends on how much content they already have on their website. Maybe they have a bunch of content, or if it's then we'll go in and try to clean it up, look at their old content, see what's not ranking, what doesn't work, try to revamp that content. But if it's someone new that doesn't really have much content on their website, then yeah, we'll start off looking at what is low hanging fruit or what's going to have the biggest impact, the quickest, and working on those keywords and trying to build it all out, but not trying to just put it all together and just throwing it out there, trying to kind of slowly trickle it out. So having that main pillar page created first, then maybe a week later, we could have a blog post. A week after that, another blog post, and just slowly trickling it out. And depending on how much, like if it's a very competitive keyword, then we're gonna have to create a lot more supporting content versus a lower competitive keyword. Then we could probably get it done with a few other content pieces that support that main piece. But that really tells us how much content and how much time needs to be allocated, and don't want to overdo it. But you want, again, just try to think how to keep it looking natural. When AI first came out, people were just going into AI and saying, write me 50 blog posts about this topic to build that topical authority and topical relevancy. And they would throw it all up and it would work temporarily. But eventually Google's like, hey, what's going on? It's all low quality content. You're throwing it all up in a couple days. Very weird. Doesn't seem natural. So just trying to not throw any red flags to the search engines to trigger them, because we want to keep everything looking in as organic and natural as possible.
Brandon, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
I'd say make sure that you don't just create a page for your service or your product, but make sure you create pages that support that content, support that main page, because the more content that you put out on your website that supports that one keyword, the more relevant you become to that search, the more authority you have, and focusing on that EAT, making sure that you're trying to touch on all bases to make sure that Google sees that you are not just throwing up a page, but you actually have that relevancy around that whole entire topic. So then you could pick up on long tail keywords, variations, singular, plural, synonyms, or industry jargon, or other ways that people search, because people don't just search one way, especially nowadays with voice search. Half the searches nowadays are new searches that no one's ever seen. So if you're trying to rank for every keyword, it's not possible. But having that main focus keyword and then the supporting keywords, that's going to help you hit all the different variations and not just be stuck on that one keyword set.
Brandon Leibowitz is the owner of SEO Optimizers. Find out more over at SEOoptimizers.com. Brandon, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you for having me on.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.